retail stores or you guys are brands? What's the temperature here? All of our stores, brands, awesome. Are you guys selling online, e-commerce? Amazing. So a lot of this information is going to be super interesting for you guys as you start to think about how retail is changing over this next year. And I'm sure you guys have been seeing a lot in terms of, stores are closing, how brands are struggling. But I was just talking to a girlfriend of mine yesterday who's working over at Claire Bouvier, and she was like, yeah, it's crazy. All these things are happening in retail, and yet business is booming. And to be honest, a lot of our clients are having a similar effect, right? It might be the bigger guys and some of the bigger retailers that are struggling, but for a lot of small businesses, what the most amazing things are is that you guys have the ability to be really nimble. You guys have the ability to try new things and to experiment. And you can react a lot faster than some of the larger, bigger companies, right? So today we're going to go over a couple different key content or anything. No? Amazing. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what we do and what I do. So I used to be a buyer, so I come from the buying and planning offices of Barney's, I ran division at Gucci, I was at Macy's. I basically come from the whole merchandising sector, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been consulting small to medium-sized fashion brands and retailers on business strategy. And so we, the company now, is half a consulting group and half of it is an agency. And so on the agency side, guys, we do branding, marketing, we do consumer messaging, communication strategies, web development. On the consulting side, we basically act as a CEO for hire, if you will, right? We have a team of consultants that do everything from business management to cash flow planning, all the way through to planning their wholesale distribution, etc. So we really like to think of ourselves as not on the creative side of making product, which you guys are, those of you guys who have brands, but more on the side of business, right? How do we actually make money, right? So that is always a really exciting and interesting topic. And I think what we're starting to realize now is that the concept of making money and how we do so in a branded context is really changing, right? We used to be operating under certain business models, whereas many of us would introduce or feel like we had to have 2 collections a year, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter, those of you guys who are participating in market now. But now we find ourselves moving towards other distribution models, right? You have brands that are producing 1 time a year. You also have got brands that are producing capsule collections, producing more frequently. Their deliveries are every other month, right? So the business models are changing, right? And how you buy as a retailer is also changing just as much as how you are producing as a brand owner, right? So what's so cool and interesting in today's climate is that what you've got here is an amazing opportunity for you to be really aligned synergistically with what your brand is and then be able to communicate that. Right? Your consumers only know, guys, what it is that you tell them, right? They don't know anything else. So as you guys think about how you are developing your brands and growing them, one of the biggest pieces that we'll find as we go through all these different consumer trend forecasts in terms of how people are shopping is that it's really authenticity and messaging that is going to be able to help you drive that communication. Meaning, whatever you say is what it is as long as it's consistent. Right? The customer doesn't know otherwise. Many people who I've worked with, many young brands, and even emerging and growth stage businesses, and sometimes larger companies feel like they need to, for example, be on every single social media platform, right? They're like, oh my God, we need to be everywhere. But the real answer here is you need to be where your customers are, right? It's not about being everywhere, right? So as we start to think about where your customers are and how you're engaging with them, I'm really going to ask you to start to think about what are some of the things that you guys are doing now that you might be able to stop doing, right? What are some of the areas in which they're not really working for you so much? So you might be able to divert that attention towards other areas that are more experimental or other areas of your business that actually deserve more attention. Okay, so one of the big things that I think is so important is this concept of consumer centricity, right? And so that is your synergy between your sales, your marketing, and your merchandising. And what we're finding these days, guys, are that consumers are flocking to different kinds of experiential platforms where they can engage with product and brand, right? So when we think about how the consumer is absorbing information, what we found, and I think it was a recent Salesforce study that said 6 different touch points are needed in order for consumers to grow sales, right? In order for consumers to buy, they need to be able to engage with your brand and use different mechanisms. So when we think about consumer centricity and we think about having the consumer at the center of your marketing efforts, at the center of your sales efforts, and at the center of your product development, what we find is it's not, again, always about doing more. It's about picking your platforms, sticking to them, and then cultivating that messaging. Now, you'll find different reports on what it means to be consumer-centric, right, and how to actually evoke that into your brand. Just remember, like, the core of consumer centricity is that you're thinking about who they are from the beginning of their experience with your brand all the way through to when they receive your product, right? You're thinking about not just getting them to buy, but also the follow-up, right? What is your customer service like, right? How are you actually closing that communication beyond just getting them to buy? And so that takes a lot of thoughtful planning. You know, last week when we gave a talk I spoke here last week on Tuesday about brand storytelling, right? Consumer centricity is at the heart of brand storytelling, right? Every single messaging that we put out there needs to be reflective of who you're talking to and how you want them to communicate with your brand. Now, today's talk is really going to go over mechanisms, right? It's going to go over the different channels that we can start to exploit. So let's talk a little bit about the market overview, right? We've got individualization, which is a key core component of tomorrow's consumer, right? We have the gig economy, right? By gig economy, I mean things like Uber, right? Where you're transacting for someone's time, right? We have things like Airbnb, right? You're transacting with someone's space. So the active transactions and this ability to sell in each of us, right? All of us here who have businesses, but for anyone on the street to have a business, right? For anyone to be able to be an entrepreneur or to make money means that we have a whole new area that we need to be thinking about tapping into, right? So the gig economy is a huge thing that's happening in today's consumer base, right? In essence, anyone can be selling anything, right? And I'll go over a couple key apps that are really launching that are really interesting for you guys to keep your eye on the radar for, especially for people who are pitching to Gen Z and, you know, some of the younger on the millennial side, right? Really cool new apps coming out. And then also we have authenticity and transparency, right? And so one of the big things here that we're noticing is that consumers in 2018 and 2019 are going to be looking for a lot of authenticity and transparency from the companies that they do business with, right? So that doesn't mean that everyone who's sitting in the audience is going to say, oh yeah, I produce ethically, right? Certainly not everyone is producing with collectives or with artisans in Peru, right? Some of us are just producing in factories, but it means being authentic to your brand messaging. It means telling people what you're doing. For example, are you guys familiar with Everlane? Amazing, right? So Everlane produces in big factories, right? It's not as if they don't produce in big factories. But what do? They lift the veil of who it is that they're producing with, and they say, hey, here's our vetting process. Here are the reasons why we work with these guys. Here are some pictures of the factory. And guess what? It's not all pretty and it's not all, you know, artisanal, but it's reality, right? And so there's an element of being open and transparent on your communication channels that consumers are really looking for. Now, last year was really interesting. There were a couple key, really cool case studies that came out of last year, and also this current year. So McDonald's in Australia, right? They had an open forum where they were taking questions for people to ask them what was in their food, right? And it's so interesting. Why would anyone from McDonald's want to actually be transparent about what goes into their food, the calories, or any of that, right? But what they did is because they were open and forthcoming, and they gave their audience an opportunity to engage, they actually saw an uptick in sales in the 3 weeks after they ran the campaign. Because you know what? There's something to be said about being open. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing has to fit into some mold. It's about being authentic. Similarly, the head, Elon Musk, right? So super famous, right? It's like he is so busy. He's working on so many amazing projects. And yet he still takes the time to respond directly over tweets, specific questions that people are asking him about product development, right? Or questions or concerns that they have. So as each of you guys sit here as business owners, we should also be thinking about ourselves as thought leaders. we should also be thinking about ourselves as the faces of our brands, even though our face may not be on the about page, right? And when you guys think about your Twitter profiles, it's not about tweeting for your business, right? Twitter is not a platform that's great for businesses as far as like transaction and sales, but as a thought leader who's potentially looking to get coverage from a certain editor or looking to get written up by a certain publication, being on Twitter and establishing yourself as a thought leader can be something that is very advantageous to you and then therefore to your business, right? So when we start to think about branded communications, it's not just about pushing out product, right? It's also about thinking about elevating the entire branded platform, which includes each of you, right? As much as you are engaged with your business. The same thing goes for your employees, right? When we think about communication and how consumers are absorbing communication, right? If you've noticed, a lot of the editors and buyers at stores have huge followings, right? And why is that? Well, they're not pushing and selling product, but they're espousing a certain kind of brand, vision, and voice, right? In essence, they are all miniature representatives of the company. So when you guys think about who you're hiring and you think about the people who are also espousing your brand, right? Encourage them to be able to be more vocal and encourage them to talk more openly about the business, right? Because in essence, every communication that you have is an opportunity for branding. So these are the ways in which we deliver the message, right? We have all these different messages we want to communicate, and these are some of the new ways in which we will be communicating them. Voice search, really big. Is anyone here using voice yet to be able to search? Huge trend, right? When we think about voice, and I'll unpack some statistics and data and ways to think about this, but voice is a new phenomenon, and it's something that's happening very quickly. When you think about the voice dictation button, if you guys have an iPhone or any mobile device, you click on it, you speak into it, boom, you're searching for something, right? If anyone's thinking about getting a Alexa or an Echo or a Google Home, again, it's all voice activation, right? So a big trend in 2018 is going to be the adaptation of us to voice search. The next thing is going to be obviously your mobile sites, right? So when we think about mobile, it's not going to be about, oh, let's build an e-commerce site and just make sure it's optimized for mobile. It's going to be thinking about ways in which we can activate mobile in a more hyper-location-based way, right? So when someone does tap into your site, they are able to get direct access to where they are. Maybe they get specific recommendations, etc. We'll unpack some more strategies with that. Next, we have text selling. Anyone familiar now with text selling? Anyone sign up for company text messages? All right. So company text messages are another thing that's going to become big in 2018. You're starting to see it roll out this year, right? So we're starting to see certain companies adopt that as a platform. And it's not just a channel for selling, right? It becomes a channel, again, for branded communication. So I want us to think a little bit more cohesively here. These channels that we're talking about aren't just platforms to transact, right? These are platforms in order for your brand to be on the forefront of brand communication and of branding for the customer. In a customer-centric world, you're not pitching them with sales all the time. You're speaking with them. You're talking in a conversation. It is a collaborative experience. It is not one in which you're shoving product down their throat, right? So when we talk about all these different platforms, this isn't necessarily about pushing product always. It's about pushing branded communication. So next we're going to go into mixed realities. We've heard of augmented reality, we've heard of virtual reality, but mixed reality is a little bit different, right? Mixed reality is really using your cell phone, using mobile technology to be able to integrate into a little bit more mixed reality, right? It's not totally virtual, it's not totally augmented. Those of you guys who are experiencing any type of AR on your phones now, we're probably experiencing it more in terms of a mixed reality, right? Because we don't have the technology and software on a more mass level. And then obviously I'll go into some new apps and some things that you should be on your radar. And then lastly we'll talk about in-store stuff, because as we talk about consumer trends, guys, it's not always digital. One of my favorite things to always note to an audience is that, yes, we spend about 5 to 7 hours a day on our computers and we're working. However, guys, there are 24 hours in the day, these days, guys, one of the biggest trends in stores, you go into a store, you look around, well, you look up the product on your phone because you want to see what other people are talking about, right? You want to learn a little bit more information, and you may not necessarily want to, wait or have to hunt down a salesperson, right? So mobile is becoming an extension of customer service, right? In store and out of store as you're trying to convert those sales. Okay, let's talk about voice search. So this is super cool, and you guys who are not using it yet, I highly encourage you to spend some time doing voice search on your phone, right? And that is on the most basic level, right? And so when I say that, what I mean is pick up your phone, hit the voice dictation, and ask it a question. Where is the closest Pizza Hut, right? Where is the closest Macy's? Where is the nearest small boutique, right? And what we're noticing with voice search is that it's becoming a lot more dependent on long tail keywords. Are any of you guys activating on social SEM or SEO, search engine marketing or optimization? Great. So what's been a big trend up to date is looking at SEO and SEM from a couple different standpoints. One has been optimizing for words that are misspelled, because oftentimes people misspell words, and you can definitely capture those leads. And then the other one is starting to look at long tail keywords, which is, instead of saying little black dress, you would say something like, what to wear out to dinner with my girlfriends, or I'm meeting my boyfriend's parents for the first time, what should I wear? And these are long-term key search terms. And what's so important about these guys is as you start to move, and as we move more into voice search, how we end up using these long-tail keywords and phrases become more important, right? And so voice search is going to allow for us as consumers to ask really detailed and intricate questions. It's also going to allow us to ask for more specific things, right? We're not going to have the same issues with spelling and grammar as we would before when people were typing in their searches, but things are becoming more individualized, right? We're becoming more optimized. And I'm sure many of you guys have seen this even just on the consumer side, right? As we are all business owners, we are all also consumers. So what I would say is start to ask your SEO specialist to revisit your SEO long tail keywords, right? What are the ways in which your product descriptions can start to fit into someone's life? Now, it's unfortunate, but these days I still see online descriptions for products that are totally basic and irrelevant and don't mean anything to anybody, right? It's like you have a top on the screen and it's like black t-shirt, 100% cotton, and that's it, right? And if you're a big brand, awesome. You probably don't need to have anything more because people are coming to your site, you're already having traffic, and maybe it's part of your brand identity to have things that are really basic and simple, and maybe you're pushing more on the marketing side. But for those of you guys who are looking to drive traffic and looking to optimize now in terms of SEO and SEM, I would highly encourage you to start to ask yourself, what are your products in context of your consumer? Right? How does someone use your product? When you're uploading the images onto your website, right, it's not just about black dress 005, it's about black dress for XYZ, right? Because images are also being indexed, right? So it's a combination of not just your product descriptions, but also how we're optimizing for images and making sure that we're writing product descriptions that are indicative of a consumer lifestyle. Now, the other thing I would say is for search engine marketing, right? So that's going to be paid on Google, etc. That is still a big platform, right? One of our clients ended up spending, I think it's like $1,500 a month for search engine marketing, and just last month the ROI on that was $8,000, right? It's a big market, and when we think about how you can best implement that, again, it's going to be in context of longer tail keywords and being able to really get in front of your customer. So you may not see a ton of volume, right? It may not be that your SEM is getting so many clicks, but again, guys, don't be so impressed by clicks, be impressed by conversion, right? Be impressed by what the actual results are, not just how many people saw it, right? We want people to be buying. Now, if this whole world is new to you from a digital marketing standpoint, or you have a new business or a business that is just getting off the ground, well, certainly, brand awareness and having reach is very important. It's important because you product. Like I said a few minutes ago, you have 6 different touch points that you want to be getting in front of your consumer, right? So when we think about that, SEM and SEO could be 2 of those different touch points. Any questions on voice search? Anyone gonna start to look into that? Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's so cool, right? Even if you just start to play with it as a consumer. And what I would say is start to take a look at things like Alexa and Echo and Google Home and start to dig around and see what's going on behind the scenes there as far as what kinds of collaborations or ways in which you can leverage advertising and marketing on those platforms if you are selling, let's say, for example, on Amazon. Okay, so mobile sites. All of your e-commerce sites are all mobilized, or they're all ready for mobile, yes? Amazing. How about the lead time to open or to download a page? Right? Sometimes when we think about optimizing things for mobile, we forget that you have less attention span to get someone to open a mobile page than maybe you would on a desktop or on any other tablet or laptop, right? When you're on mobile, it's all about immediacy. And so when you start to think about being mobile optimized, when you start to think about why it's so important, it's even more integral for you to ask yourself a few key questions about what you're doing currently. Number 1, how quickly is your site actually loading? Right? Number 2, can you start to integrate more hyper customization and localization onto your mobile sites? Meaning, when people sign up or people come to your site, could you have them log in with Facebook? Could you have them log in with Google? Can you then use their name on your website? Hey Syama, how's it going? Right? Oh, hey Syama, I saw you were looking at this. You might want to try that. Right? Starting to integrate personalization and integrating with your mobile technology is going to be an amazing way to start to find that one-on-one communication. Like I said, consumers for next year and the future are looking for individualization. It's a similar psychological effect as when you open up an email and there's your name in the email, right? Even if you know it's a mass email, but your name is in the email, all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, oh hey, that person is making a connection with me. Similarly, when you start to implement this onto your mobile sites, right? And in fact, it happens faster, right? And so depending on your capacity to be able to integrate these things, I would say number 1, think about logging in with Facebook, think about logins with Google. And number 2, start to think about ways in which you might be able to customize the assortment based on where they are. Now, of course, this does require working with someone on the tech side, right? This is going to be difficult for you to implement on your own unless you have someone who's going to be able to manage this for you. However, if you are able to execute this efficiently, what you're going to find is it'll be much easier for you then to synergize a customer profile on mobile to when you, let's say, do a pop-up shop, right, or any other platform, and you go, hey, do you have an account with us, right? Oh, what's your email? Let me look you up. I recently went to the Glossier showroom in New York, right? It was super cool. It's up in their penthouse. It's, it's where their offices are. And it was awesome because they've integrated, right, everything on their website. And again, Glossier is an online destination, right? But when you go to the checkout, they ask you about what your email address is. And then they go, oh, I saw you bought this, this, and this. Have you thought about this thing? Right? It gives them an opportunity for upselling, right? It gives you better opportunities to be able to make suggestions and recommendations to your customers the more data that you have. Now, one of the things that I find is challenging as a small business, right, is finding the right avenues and the right places to be able to invest your dollars in order to see the right ROI. Now, certainly optimizing things in terms of SEO is like, okay, I can hire someone to help us with long-tail keywords. That is something you might even be able to spearhead on your own. But when we think about things like mobile, this is an area where you cannot afford to not be progressive and to not be testing and doing more experimentation. Because what we're going to find, guys, is that people are slowly shifting away, right, from buying things on their computer, and they're buying more and more from their mobile devices, and they're also buying higher ticket items, right? People used to say, oh, is anyone going to buy a luxury item from their mobile phone? Yes, they are buying luxury items from their mobile phone, right? They were buying items on subscription basis. They were buying items that are $250, $500, $1,500, $2,000 on their mobile devices. And why are they choosing to do that? Well, because they're getting branded experiences, right? They're getting consumer experiences that allow them to convert easily, where the customer feels like they're in a conversation with the brand, right? It feels like they're at home, right? It's easy for them to buy. So don't think about these technologies as barriers, right? Think of them as opportunities, right? They're opportunities for you to refine your messaging. Yes?
Can you talk about the difference or benefits of a mobile site versus an app?
Yes. So mobile site is important because you don't know if they're going to download an app, right? So I would say apps are amazing, and push notifications, I think, are brilliant, right? If you are able to create an app that has enough content to be able to engage someone, right? So when you think about what an app's purpose is, the app's purpose is to not only sell products and show products, and if you have a ton of products and you're always updating it, then an app is great, right? Because you have so many new things to be able to push out. However, if you're only producing a couple of collections a year, then you have to ask yourself, what are the reasons why someone would come to our app? What other kinds of content and information make our app worthwhile, right? So do you have an area of, blogs or people who are writing for you and really cool content? And so every week or every day there's something new and exciting. You have to think about the immediacy of the information, right? Most of the apps we have on our phones have utility. Right? There are things that we check often, right? It's like, oh, I need that, so I have an app for that. That's why I use the app, right? So think of the app as the shortcut, So if you have a lot of content, if you have a lot of products, and let's say you're selling multiple brands on your e-commerce platform, then having an app is amazing because push notifications are really useful. However, on your e-commerce site, you can also enable push notifications as well, right? So there's apps like Push Crew and other sites that allow you to integrate easily with push, right? So I'd say definitely do push, but apps may or may not be a good fit, right? Mobile sites are almost a mandatory, right? And I think it's important to also think about your mobile version of your site doesn't necessarily need to be or should be an exact one-to-one replication of your e-commerce platform because navigation is different. What people are looking for is different. So think about the ways in which you can tailor your mobile experience, right? So that it's not just like, it's not clunky, right? And I don't just mean navigation, I mean the content, right? The merchandising and the layout. It's a great question. And when you guys have been seeing these retailers that are closing, and I know there's been this huge talk of retail apocalypse and what's happening in the industry, ask yourself, what were they doing in terms of innovation? What were they doing in terms of activating on mobile? What was their strategy? Were they investing enough? Now, one of the big things that we do at the agency is we are huge proponents of planning out your budget, doing your marketing strategy, doing the things that work, but allocating resources to experimentation. Right? You guys might be saying to yourself, well, I have a limited budget, I'm just going to keep doing the things that I know work. The problem is if you only do the things that work, pretty soon they're not going to work anymore. Right? And why is that? Well, the more people you have on a platform, the more saturated the channels become, the harder it is for you to carve out a niche and a space for yourself. Right? So having an amazing mobile device now, right, a mobile site where a lot of smaller to medium-sized brands are, starting to adopt that and saying, hey, we're going to go big on this, right? We're going to make this a priority for the business. Well, that's really important, right? Because we know that that's where things are going, right? Similarly, when we think about, things like text communication, which I'm going to go into next, right? These are not things that we should be fighting against, right? This is just where it's going. Either you're going to get with it now, or it's going to happen and you're going to be like, oh shit, like I missed the boat on this, right? So let's avoid that, right? By starting to get on board with these things now. Okay, so text communication. I love text communication. I love text communication because number one, it's pretty new, right? So that means that a lot more people are going to be opening up your text. Similar with Instagram stories. You remember when Instagram stories, first came out? With Instagram stories, you would get a notification that someone had done their story, right? It was like, ooh, this is new, this is new. previously you were driven to do it because it was the first time, right? You were driven to do it because it was new and interesting. Now it's like, oh yeah, everyone's doing stories, right? Similarly with Instagram Live, right? It used to be Instagram Live was like so new and so exciting and interesting. And now, oh my gosh, everyone's going live, and it's just going to continue to push more and more. So Instagram Live and Stories should still be channels that you guys are focusing on. And again, this is more for new things, right? So we're not really talking so much about the things we know you should be doing, but more about the things you should be doing you may not have considered yet. But text communication is going to be the next thing you've got to be focusing on, right? And so that means looking at integrations with apps like Twilio, with Nexus, with Nexmo, and being able to ask yourself, hey, what are the ways in which we can do our brand extensions on a text platform? Now with these platforms, and there are certainly others, you only pay for the messages that you send. So if you're a small business, right, and you're like, oh, can I take on this extra, expenditure? Is this something that I want to invest my time and energy into? Yeah, you might need a developer to help you set it up, right? But once it's been set up and you know how you're going to be communicating, right, try communicating and pushing out and driving your consumers to use those platforms. Now you see here a couple of different examples, right? Save an extra 15% if you, text this to this phone number. Smaller companies like Grapes and other brands are starting to introduce it. And guess what? They're not just using it, again, to push product. They're saying, hey, here's a cool new piece of news. Hey, did you see us in this publication? Hey, oh my gosh, we're going to be heading to Los Angeles to do a pop-up shop. Oh, hey, we just opened up a new distribution point, right? When Grapes started to get sold at Nordstrom's, you know what? They sent out a text message to everyone. Hey, oh my gosh, isn't this so cool? Look at what we're doing. So think about text communication as one of the newer forms of email, right? And the great thing about text is that it's still so new that when people see the text, they're going to open it, right? They're not getting bombarded with text messages yet. And you might be asking yourself, is this too invasive? Is this too much? And this is one of the things that we oftentimes hear from people when it comes to even emails, right? Sometimes people are like, oh, can I send an email every week? How much is too much when it comes to emails? But guess what, guys? Statistics have shown that even having emails that go unopened, right, but having the cadence and the consistency of emails in your inbox actually reinforces the brand messaging, right? So you might say to yourself, oh, I'm only going to send an email out, every time I get a new delivery, or every time I go on sale. But you know what? You're training your customers to only pay attention to you when something goes on sale. You're training them to only engage with you when there's something new. You want them to be engaging with you 360 degrees, right? You want them to be involved in your world. Part of your branding and your communication strategy should be to share with them what the world is of your business. Again, not just to transactionally sell the product. Because the companies that focus on communication and on branded assets and on getting their messaging out there, those are the ones that are going to survive. The retail apocalypse is happening for the brands that focus only on transactionality, right? Because again, consumers are looking for authenticity and transparency, right? They are looking for a communication with the brand, not just to the brand, right? Not just, hey, buy this thing. So texting is going to be extremely, extremely important, right? And so I would say, guys, this should be on one of your key strategies to test out for 2018. I would start to look into how you can incorporate your brand messaging and your brand properties into texting. Bless you. And what you'll find is that it's not that difficult, right? It's simply a matter of populating your messages. And even if you start off very simply as when a customer places an order and you want to ask them how their purchase was, try sending them a text message, right? Now, you are going to have to start to integrate into your checkout a little box. Hey, can we contact you to see how your purchase was, or can we contact you over texting? My dry cleaner does it. It's awesome, right? Your stuff is ready. I'm like, that's so cool. It's amazing. I never think about it, right? So you want it to be like that, right? And as we become more sophisticated with our texting communication platforms, you're going to start to see things like suggestive selling via texting, right? Meaning like, hey, you bought this. Oh my gosh, this just came in. And it's going to become a more automized. However, at this stage, Those sophistications are not yet something that's been mass rolled out, and certainly it would take a dedicated customer service person to be able to do suggestive selling or upselling over text. So just something to think about in terms of like the horizon. But for the time being, start to think about what your communication strategy is and how something like text messaging can play a role in that strategy. Questions about texting? Do it. Okay, so mixed reality, right? So when we talk about mixed reality, right, we talk about getting involved into technologies. Obviously, depending on your budgets and what you're allocating for marketing, for experimentation, this may or may not be something that falls into your capacities. However, there are opportunities to do collaborations and to be working with tech startups that are interested in doing fun and cool things with brands. Now, it's so interesting. I was just on the phone the other day with a tech startup called Talkoot, and they're optimizing copywriting, which is insane, right? They're optimizing copywriting. They're like, oh, we'll take care of everyone's copywriting. They're so big and they're so well developed on the tech side, and yet we're having this conversation because they're like, hey, how do we get in front of brands? How do we talk to brands? Right? So we start to think about how technology is starting to integrate so closely, right, with fashion, with brands, with retailing. Think of yourselves as these key ambassadors and people who are willing and open to be collaborating and to be working with them, right? Think about pitching them yourself. Hey, this is what I'm working on. I would love to be able to integrate or try something new with a tech application. Are you guys looking for experimentation? Are you guys looking for, guinea pigs, for example, right? And being open to be able to do those collaborations not only will give you access to technology first, right, but it gives them data, right? It gives them an opportunity to see how it works, right? So while you guys may not be an ASOS or Ukes or an IKEA, right, you might be able to do augmented reality or mixed reality by saying, hey, here's how the furniture is going to look in the store, right? Or hey, this is how it's going to look on you. While you may not have those capacities to roll them out in terms of huge, big launches, you do have the capacity to reach out and see if there are potential collaborators and other people who can work with you. Yes?
There is a new, I think it's like Alexa, where having people or whatever, it actually works with you as a sub. So you can
Yes.
stand in front of it, it'll take a picture of you, and it'll work with you as a stylist. So that's
Yeah.
another kind of mixed reality.
Yeah,
And it's more
absolutely.
affordable.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as we start to see Amazon roll out so many new areas of tapping into fashion, right, we're going to start to see technologies like that become more easily accessible on scale. I've been asked quite a few times from like Internet Retailer and a bunch of other publications, like, what is it that I think about Amazon, right? So I'm just going to tell you what I think real fast. When I think about Amazon and when I think about what they're doing and when I think about what their opportunities are, I see them as a tech giant, right? I see them as an opportunity to take ideas and to scale the best of ideas and to do so by owning fulfillment, to do so by owning distribution, to do so by integrating with new technologies. They have yet, right? And remember, they've hired experts. I used to work at Barney's, right? Julie Gilhart was the big fashion director there. They hired her to help with, rolling out Amazon fashion. They hired a whole host of people who are experts in the industry to help them with fashion. But what they are missing is branding. What they're missing is communication on a more emotional level with consumers, right? Even as we see Amazon rolling out private label, right? Trying to dominate key categories because obviously they have so much data, right? They can see what everyone's doing. They can see how people are consuming and shopping and what they're looking at and not looking at. And they can roll out private label in order to compete with every single brand that's selling on Amazon. But what they suck at, right, is brand storytelling, right? What they suck at is emotional communication, right? Because you're still going to Amazon.com, right? You're still going through to a place where you can also buy, diapers and Shout and maybe a handbag, right? So consumers who are looking to buy goods like, clothing and accessories, etc., they are looking for emotional connections and transparency. So until Amazon launches with microsites, and they start to develop more branded platforms, that is still going to be an area where they're not succeeding in, which it means it's an area where you guys can succeed in that, right? It's an area where you can own that conversation. You know, one of the things I was reading about this morning, it was about emotional connection. You know, I like to use the word manufacturing desire, right? And when we think about manufacturing desire, right, that is something that requires effort, branding, content, communication. That is something, again, that Amazon has not invested in. They've invested in the technology side. So, as I digress. But when it comes to mixed reality, guys, I would say those of you who are interested in capturing your audience and keeping them around longer and showing them that you guys are on the forefront of things, I highly suggest that you guys take a look at partnering up with different companies, new tech startups, the ones that are really interested in getting data and seeing how it works, because you have very eager people on the tech side who want to try these things out, and guess what? They want to work with small businesses because they want to make sure it works before they pitch big businesses, right? They want to make sure that there's validity in the market, that there aren't any hiccups, right? So there's a huge opportunity for that. Okay, so now we get into new apps, right? And so obviously you guys are often on Snapchat, people are on Instagram, obviously Facebook, but what about the new apps that people are not talking about as much? These are the apps that you guys need to be investigating now, right? One of the guys who I love, and you know, sometimes he annoys me, but ultimately I love him, which is Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He annoys me because he's like so aggressive all the time, but he's brilliant. And one of the things that I love that he talks about is attention arbitrage. Right? What does he mean by that? Well, what he means is how do you get in front of your customers first, before your competitors, and how do you really meet your customers with where they are? So it's not about being on Snapchat if your customers are on Snapchat. It's about being where they are going to be. So those of you guys who have Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and a whole host of other things, I would say stop and ask yourself, where is our customer and what are those platforms that we actually need to be on, as opposed to driving yourself crazy with content management and being able to chase these different consumers on these different platforms. So let's unpack a couple of the new things that we should be taking a look at. So you guys familiar with Musical.ly? That one I think is like gaining steam. Okay, someone's excited about Musical.ly. Oh, awesome. So Musical.ly is lip syncing, right? It's like, again, these are mostly apps that are kind of geared towards Gen Z, I would say. And then this is so funny, you guys familiar with Gen Alpha? So Gen Alpha is people we're going to be talking about in the next few years, right? Because they're the younger versions of Gen Z, right? So Millennial, Z, Alpha, right? And then there's going to be Beta or something else out there. And those have yet to be intentionalized into the world. Okay, so Musical.ly, right? Lip syncing, right? These are micro-influencers who are gaining lots of steam on these platforms. Again, these are all younger targeted audiences. I would say definitely in the Gen Z, some of the younger millennials are going to be starting to adopt these. If you guys are targeting or segmenting to an older demographic, I would say sticking to your, I say look at the more, the older technologies, right? By that I mean Facebook. As an older technology, right? Where you go to see your family, and your grandmother, and your friends, and your aunt, right? That would be Facebook, right? And then when we think about the targeting as far as the more mass adaptations, we're looking at, Instagram as being really for the masses, and Pinterest alongside that, right? And then we start to see Snapchat, and I swear since Snapchat IPO'd, and it all went south, I think there's been a lot of mixed feeling on the market about the viability of Snapchat going forward, especially since a lot of their technologies are being adopted by Instagram and Facebook as well. So what I would say is that some of these technologies, these apps are going to start to see, they're going to start to rival for that Snapchat customer, right? So Musical.ly, video lip syncing, this is great for micro-influencers, right? All these are going to be great for micro-influencers. Yellow, another new app, is there to make friends, right? It's like a friend group app, right? It's like you meet new people, you connect with randoms, you get a chance to engage with new people. We also have Lively. You're looking for numbers, you're looking for quality, right? So if there's something like Lively would be amazing to take a look and see who are the big influencers who are attracting the crowds, and how can you partner up with them to do product placement, right? Because again, it doesn't always have to be a buy this now, but it could be an awesome thing that you're wearing, and into any of the sponsorship rules, right, that we have now on things like Instagram, right? So you guys all know now Instagram, when you do a sponsored post, right, you're now required to indicate if it is sponsored or not sponsored, right? So they're starting to become more compliant, like FTC compliant, and all these things are happening. Right? These newer apps have less regulation because they're still very experimental, right? So more opportunities for subliminal advertising. And then we also have these last two, Yay and Pickle. Right? So Yay is a selling platform with video. It's basically people who go on there, they'll do little micro videos, and they will sell their product. Right? Now that's amazing because this means with any of you guys who have, let's say, you want to find a new channel or you want to hire someone or work with someone to focus solely on that. Maybe there's an intern, right? Maybe you've got yourself a high school intern or a college intern who's really eager and excited to try new technologies. Give them this opportunity. Hey, we want you to create a channel for yourself on this new app. And we want you to be selling our products. Right? Think about also that in terms of Pickle. So Pickle is more of a gig economy for teenagers. Right? So that means, hey, can you, I need to mow the lawn, right? Can you do it for me? I'll pay you $10. Right? That's amazing, right? That teenagers are able to transact in this same capacity. Right? So again, when we start to think about how we can leverage these people or work with these people, it would be very simple. It would be looking for someone who's on Pickle, who's selling product, or who's selling and trading services and saying, hey, are there stylists on there? People who are offering to help someone, with their outfits. Or again, maybe you have your intern go on there and say, hey, gig economy opportunity. We have a stylist, right? Pay $10 or $5 and we'll help you style your outfit. Right? Again, all of a sudden your brand is becoming embedded into the lifestyle of the consumer rather than just selling to them. Right? So what I would say, guys, is start to evaluate your channels. Right? Start to figure out what are the platforms that you really should be on. Allocate time to experimentation and really start to work with influencers. Right? It is important. The micro-influencers are important. Larger influencers are also important because what we're finding now, guys, is influencers and influencer activity is more valuable. Right? It's more valuable than a paid advertisement. Right? So when you even ask yourself, is it worthwhile to be on influencers or to pay to transact with influencers? I would say, well, what's your total marketing budget? Right? What are you allocating towards your regular advertising channels? And then what is it you can start to put aside to make sure that you're activating with influencers, either micro or macro? Any questions about this? Have you guys heard of these? Yes? No? Amazing. Okay, so if you guys are targeting this younger consumer and you're looking to grow up with the consumer, right, then I would say start to take a look at some of these platforms. Okay, in store. So remember, we opened up the conversation talking about the consumer and how they spend so much of their time on their phones, on their tech devices. However, guys, like I mentioned, they still go into stores, right? They are still shopping. In fact, Fred Siegel just did a pop-up. They have a shop-in-shop with atelier and repairs, right? We're also seeing more event marketing, right? There was Denim Day Festival in New York City. Right, so we start to think about the experimental aspect of this and also experiential aspect of this. A huge part of your marketing budgets and activities 2018 and go forward, and hopefully Q4 of this year, because we still have time to do this, should involve some kind of consumer engagement. It should require some sort of pop-up shop, some sort of shop-in-shop, or maybe it's an opportunity for you to go into some co-retailing opportunities. Right? And are you guys familiar with co-retailing? Okay. So co-retailing is, in essence, you renting out space in a retail store. Right? So in New York, you've got places like Air, you've got places like Flying Solo, where in essence, and even Artists and Fleas, where in essence you are paying, let's say $1,500 or $800, however much the amount is, to have your product stocked in those places. You might be asking yourself, why on earth would I pay to have my stuff sold in another store? And I'm both a critic and a fan of this. I'm a critic in the sense that I believe that these retail stores should be really clear and upfront about what the opportunities are to work with them. Some of the places will offer so many different channels, like, oh, we'll do PR and marketing, and we'll be a brick and mortar storefront for you. So I'm a critic. I believe you guys should only be doing and working with people that are really upfront about what they're good at, right? It's like, work with a company that they know they're good at. And so are they really good at PR and marketing? I don't know about that. But they might be in a high profile, high traffic space, right? In which case that means that you'll then be able to take advantage of the people coming through the door. So why is that important? Well, it's important because everyone needs to have a in-person, customer-facing touch point, right? So that means you've got to have an opportunity and a way for people to actually touch and feel your product. Doesn't mean that it needs to be all the time. You don't have to have a brick and mortar store, but having placement in a brick and mortar store or doing a pop-up allows our consumers to really connect with you. One of the brands that I've been following closely that I love is the Arrivals. Are you guys familiar with them? They're based in New York. They do a lot of denim. They're now expanding into other kinds of ready-to-wear. And what I love about what they were doing is they implemented and have implemented a really great strategy, right? On their Instagram marketing and their Instagram advertising, where everyone else was pushing product, they were pushing their press. They were saying, see the jacket that Vogue.com, style editor can't live without. Right? They're pushing their press, not just buy now. And now they've launched on a 3-city tour for a pop-up shop. They're doing New York, San Francisco, and LA. And they're not doing it for very long. It's going to be a week in each different venue. But what's amazing is they're basically tying together their digital strategy and closing the consumer to come back to their pop-up shop to make a purchase. Everlane does the same thing, and lots of brands are doing pop-up shops and shop-in-shops, right? Just to clarify what a shop-in-shop is it's really a store within a store, right? So a pop-up shop is going to be an opportunity where you have your own products. Either it's a branded collaboration with other brands. I would say also think about other kinds of products. So maybe you're also looking at food. Maybe you're also looking at partnering up with a hairstylist or someone who's doing hair for consumers. Maybe you're also looking at music, right? It's not just co-branded in terms of, hey, I make dresses, you make shoes, let's do something, right? It's thinking, again, a little bit more holistically about that consumer experience, right? How can you offer them services or offer them things that are going to help them feel like you're adding value to their life? So when you start to think about how your approach is going to be when it comes to an in-store or let's say a live in-person selling event, we also want to think about, what is the ideal length of time? How long should you be doing this, whether it's a weekend or a week or a month, right? Those are really important. You also want to decide on your location, right? So do not get fooled by getting a really cheap space and say, well, I'm just going to get people to come to this space. It doesn't work like that, right? You guys are probably all living in Los Angeles, right? So if you're in Los Angeles, you'll know the dropout rate, the further someone has to go on a card, the least likely they are to show up, right? It's insane. They're just not going to show up. Oh, it's 45 minutes away. Not happening. Not for a pop-up, right? However, right, if you can build momentum around things, right? So for example, you guys familiar with the brand Future Perfect? No? Okay. So you should all look them up. They just opened up a private by appointment sales showroom for consumer facing in the Hollywood Hills, and you have to call and make an appointment, right? And what's amazing is they opened up the strategy also in New York, and what's so cool about it is that they're getting people to want to go, right? It's like, can you imagine? It's like, oh, this is so exclusive. You can't just show up, right? We need to drive kind of manufacturing desire. So when you think about executing on these things, you've got to ask yourself, what are the different channels that we can be pushing in order to drive, whether it's exclusivity, whether it's doing something big, how Goop did a few years ago, where it was a lot of different brands, and they did events around it, they did classes around it, and it was super engaging, right? So think about what your unique brand take is on these different elements, especially in store, because guess what? This is not going to be cheap. Right? To execute a good pop-up shop is not going to be as simple as saying, hey, I'm just going to put a product in the store. Right? Doing a very well-run pop-up shop is going to take time in terms of a strategy for marketing, understanding what kind of merchandise and product you're going to put in there, activating your partnerships. So think about how difficult it is, let's say, to get something done on the day-to-day. Well, think about working with partners, right? And working with other people with different timelines and priorities, right? When we work with clients, we're advising them on, their holiday capsule collections and what they're doing. I'm like, you guys better be thinking about this in January, right? Because by the time you end up pushing it out, it's going to take so much time in terms of collaborations, what the price points are, how you're going to be marketing it, what the merchandise mix is, all of that stuff. So give yourself plenty of time. When you guys hear of great opportunities, oh my gosh, someone's going to let me do a thing in their space, it may not be worth it, right? Because you have to ask yourself, do I have the resources and the time to execute on this properly? Because giving you a free space is helpful, but doesn't really do it, right? What you need beyond a free space is actually the marketing channels, the vehicles, the right location, the right collaborators to make it happen. All right, guys, that is it as far as what's happening, what you guys should be thinking about for 2018. Those are the major trends in terms of how consumers are going to be shopping, how people are going to be experimenting and engaging with product. Do you guys have any questions or anything that I can kind of answer for you? Amazing. Well, thank you guys for coming.